Good evening, everyone. We're starting a little bit late, but I think that's all right. My name is Chris Belland. I'm the Program and Outreach Manager for Veterans Relations here with the Minnesota Historical Society. And I'd like to welcome everyone here in the auditorium and our overflow in Deluxe 1 and 2 to our 12th program of a special 12th program of the 38th year here at the Roundtable. And without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Don Patton.
Again, welcome. Beautiful day and an unbelievable crowd tonight. Thank you for coming. Welcome again. I know we've got some World War II veterans that are going to be recognized as a part of the program, but are there any other? Bob Mickelson, would you stand up? Bob Mickelson, B-29. Are there any others in the audience? Bob was a B-29 gunner, shot down over Japan, POW for several months at the end of the war. And Bob, we're going to try to recruit you for our first program in September. We're doing a VJ program in September, so be alert. This is the next to last program. Next month in May, we're doing a special VE Day program, and look forward to doing that. As far as year 39, we're looking at a great year. I'll just give you a couple of teasers. We're doing a program on the Nuremberg trials, and I've scheduled the keynote speaker for the 80th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials in Germany to be our speaker, so it'll be a great event. We're doing a program on the atomic bomb and have a great speaker for that also. One of the things that this coming Saturday, the tour that we organize is headed out for Holland and going from Holland to Berlin. But we're working on the schedule right now for next year's roundtable trip, which will be Sicily and Italy. So we'll have more information on that in the fall. One other handout that's in the audience, a great event that we participate in. There's a Veterans Benefit Cruise in Stillwater. John has got these handouts. It's on August 11th. And every year, they must bribe the weatherman because it's just been a perfect night for cruising on the St. Croix. So it's a good cause, and you'll meet some veterans for that. This is a program that we've been working on for almost 2 years, and we hope that it hasn't been a disappointment to get Major Luckadoo up here. But I want to introduce Mark Copeland. Mark and Lucky's traveling assistant, Bunker Hill, made this happen. And we want to feature the 4 veterans that we have on the program tonight. But I want to pay special tribute to Mark Copeland that made this happen. Mark is one of the most unbelievable aviation minds, and he leads the 8th Air Force tours out of Savannah. So I'm going to introduce Mark, if you'll take over and go from here.
Yes, sir. Well, I owe him $20. Thank you, Donna. It's a very warm welcome, and welcome to everybody tonight for tonight's program. Life is made of special moments in time, which will forever create a lasting memory or leave an impact for the rest of your life. And we hope tonight is one of those special moments. For tonight, you're going to be witnessing history and learning from those who were part of the greatest air armada in human history, the United States Army Air Corps 8th Air Force. You'll also hear from, first from our esteemed guest, Mr. Luckadoo, and joining him will be 3 additional 8th Air Force vets. If you added the ages of these gentlemen, it comes to 405 years of life. And that, which is pretty astonishing. Thank you. I'm sorry I knocked it off here. Thank you. That's fine. It's all good. The gentleman, we're going to first bring up John and have a little chat with him, and then we're going to bring the other gentleman up, so we'll get a chance to hear a little bit about their stories. Before we start the evening here, I just wanted to acknowledge a couple special friends to the Minnesota World War II Roundtable that through their very, very incredibly generous contributions and donations made this happen. First of all is Mr. Pat Harker. Pat, are you up here someplace? Pat invited John up to his private hangar at Anoka County Airport, and we had a fantastic day. The second gentleman that I wanted to recognize in the audience is Mike Belzer, who has also been very, very generous to our organization here over the years. And lastly, to the staff of the Minnesota History Center, first Mr. Kent Whitworth. Kent, are you in the audience this evening? I hope. We're in Kent's house. He is the executive officer and the chief director of the Minnesota Historical Society. And a shout out goes to Doug Rainey and to Chris Beland and our video folks, and Mark back up behind the counter or behind the booth up there. They are truly the men behind the curtain, if you will. They really make this thing happen and make our presentations really first class. Also want to recognize two friends that drove all the way from Madison, Wisconsin to be here tonight. Good friends John Kruger and Jeff Barrett. And thanks, even though I know you're Packer fans, you're still okay. So that's good. And also to Charles Bunker Hill, Lucky's traveling companion. He's been steady on, facilitating John's needs here, and we really appreciate him taking time out of his life to come all the way here to Minnesota. Also, just as a personal note, I want to recognize the two best brother-in-laws a guy could ever had. My brother-in-laws, Mark Knutson and Kevin Clark. And lastly, Speaker's Privilege is a very special person that supported my interest in 8th Air Force history for over probably close to 5 decades. He's always been there to encourage and embolden and inspire me to follow my passion of history. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce my dad, Dale Copeland over here. Thanks for coming, Dad. At 103 years old, Luckadoo is the last surviving original cadre pilot of the famed 100th Bomb Group. His remarkable life has been documented in a fantastic book that you'll see here on the screen in the middle called Damn Lucky. This book was written during the pandemic with a very talented author by the name of Kevin Maurer. John and Kevin never met during the process of the book writing. They went back and forth with emails and phone calls and possibly some Zoom calls, and they created absolutely a masterpiece. I can tell you folks that I have read dozens and dozens of accounts of personal narratives of people that or veterans that flew in the mighty 8th. Nothing compares to John's book. It's riveting. It's very honest. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. He tells the truth, and you can tell just by the stories that it's genuine. And I really highly recommend it. We do have copies available, I believe, still. We only had about 60-odd copies. If you wanted to get one, just as a favor, afterwards, John will be happy to sign. But please just go up and get your book autographed, and because there'll be people waiting in line, and we don't want to be here till 2 in the morning. So thank you for that. So anyway, as I was saying, John really tells a story about a 20-year-old kid hanging on to a 4-engine unpressurized monster called a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and flying over the cruel and unforgiving skies of Fortress Europe. And tonight, we're going to have a little conversation. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it's my deep, deep honor to introduce our special guest tonight, all the way from Dallas, Texas. Let's give him a big, warm Minnesota welcome. John Luckadoo.
Well, I can't begin to tell you what a real honor and privilege it is to be here in Minnesota for these few hours and to experience your hospitality and graciousness to welcome those of us few survivors of World War II at your Minnesota Round Table. When Mark spoke to me about participating in this event a couple of years ago, I was very impressed with the fact that you, as individuals citizens, have made it your business to acquaint yourself with what went on in World War II. And none of you were born then, but a few of us were. And I have to tell you that after my war experience, I can only tell you in all honesty that I do not believe that anybody goes to war and comes back the same person. You see these pictures up here of me when I was 21 years old, innocent, gullible, terribly naive and young. And I was called upon by my country to defend our values and our democracy. After Pearl Harbor was attacked, we had no choice. The entire country was mobilized and galvanized into action. And one of my remaining missions in the life that I have left is to recognize those civilians, those who were not in uniform, but who served nobly, significantly, and magnificently to come out of the homes and go into the factories and to outproduce the world in armament for not only ourselves, but all our allies. The world has never seen before, or will again, the tremendous capability of this country to come together in unity and harmony and purpose and to produce. You never know until you're put to the test what you can do. I know I get asked frequently today whether I think the current generation would respond as my generation did. To answer the call to defend and stand up and become a veteran, the definition of which one who writes a blank check to Uncle Sam up to and including his life. But we don't know what our current generation would do, and they don't know until they're put to the test. And we didn't know. We were guinea pigs. We were being sent out as the 8th Air Force in huge armadas of heavy bombers to bring Hitler to his knees because he was evil. And we didn't know what we were going to be confronted with. But we soon discovered that we were confronted with not one enemy, but four. And they all began with the letter F. The first was fear, because we were so completely innocent as to what we were going to be confronted with. We knew that we were going against the most formidable Air Force in the world that had been fighting for 4 years, defending their homeland. They fought the Russians on the east. They went through the Battle of Britain and fought the British on the west. And they knew what they were doing. They were battle tested. We were just citizen soldiers. And we were called upon to put our lives on the line and to defend what we knew and felt so strongly and passionately that we should defend our democracy. And the second was the fighters. They had the best equipment in the world, and they knew how to use it. And the third was their flak, their anti-aircraft defenses that they could throw up around their targets, our targets. It created havoc with us, and we had no defense against it. And the fourth, was the bitter, freezing cold. We were going out in unpressurized aircraft, mass formation, broad daylight, high altitude, unpressurized, which meant that in order to survive, we had to have oxygen, supplemental oxygen above 10,000 feet. And that, coupled with that bitter cold that we had to endure for hours on end, and you can imagine how that impeded our ability to function. We only had a thin sheet of aluminum between us and the outside elements, the flak, and the fury of their fire. And if you survive that, as we four did, you were just damn lucky. That's right. I don't mean that in a profound way or a profane way. I just mean it that you had to be blessed with a guardian angel on each shoulder, or you didn't come back. And you see your friends going down in flames all around you. And you think, how in the world did I ever let myself get in this spot? Because you don't know whether ever each breath is going to be your last. And that is a very maturing experience. You grow up in a hurry to meet your responsibilities and to do the job that you were called upon to do. So briefly,
Well, should we tell the folks a little bit about your upbringing and your childhood and so forth?
well, such as it was,
Yeah. Well, John just celebrated his 103rd birthday on March 16th.
thank you.
On March 16th, he was born in 1922, and wow. John was born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and here's a little photo of him in a high school play back in the day. You were a prisoner, I believe, or a jailbreak or something
Yeah.
or other. And there's a gentleman that we're going to talk about here in a second, who is John's best friend, and he is the gentleman that is standing the tallest, second from the right, and that's Leroy Means Sully Sullivan. That was John's best friend growing up, right, John?
Well, that's another story, but it is
Yeah.
it is included in the book. When Sully and I graduated from high school in 1940 in Chattanooga, we realized that the war in Europe was really fomenting, and that it was only a question of time, in our opinion, young opinions, that we would become involved. And we were prime candidates to be called into service. So we graduated from high school together and went to the University of Chattanooga and enlisted and became, or enrolled and became fraternity brothers, and decided in our infinite wisdom that the cool thing that we should do would be, because we both wanted to learn to fly, go to Canada and join the Royal Canadian Air Force and get our wings and get our commission, and then once, inevitably, that America became involved, we could transfer to what was then the Army Air Corps. And we thought that that was a pretty smart thing to do, so we applied, and they welcomed us with open arms and said, "We'd love to train you. And here's the application." And we filled that out, and right at the bottom it said, "Because you're underage, it'll require parental consent." My good friend Sully was the only child of a World War I veteran who died a horrible death, and Sully never knew him. But he was all his mother had. And when we approached her and told her about our plan, she said, "Well, I certainly hate to see you boys do this. But Sully, if you feel this is what you must do, you have my blessing." Well, I quite naturally and innocently thought, well, if Mrs. Sullivan's willing to allow her only offspring to go to Canada and train, my parents will certainly be agreeable too. So I went home and approached my mother, and she was appalled that Mrs. Sullivan would be agreeable, but she said, "Well, I can't stand in your way. However, you've got to prove it to your father." Well, when my dad came home, he heard about the plan. And he said, "You blithering idiots don't have any idea what you're doing." That is not your business. That's a European world. You get back in school. Over my dead body would I ever grant you my permission. So as a consequence, Sully went to Canada. He trained on Spitfires. He went through the North African and Egyptian campaigns and survived. In the meantime, we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. And then there wasn't any question about my going to service. So I immediately, along with most of my fraternity brothers, enlisted in the Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program to learn to fly with the Air Corps. And then I went through about a year's training and eventually was transferred to England as a member of the original Bloody 100th Bomb Group. And Sully, finishing up in South Africa, and was transferred back to England. And he came up one day and visited me, and I took him up in a B-17. And I put him in the pilot's seat, and he looked at me, and he said, "Buster, this ain't flying. You're nothing but a truck driver." And I said, "Sully, that's right. We need truck drivers in this war, too." And he said, "Well, let's land, and you fly my Spit, and you'll know what flying is all about." I said, "That's stupid. That's dumb. That's so different from four-engine flying and with a crew. You're on your own, and I'd kill myself." And he said, "No, it's a piece of cake." So stupidly, he got up on the wing and he pointed out all of the instruments and the controls and gave me the speeds for takeoff and landing and where the wheels were and the flaps and all of this sort of thing. And he said, "Take her up." And foolishly, I did. And fortunately, and I don't know how it worked, I managed to get it around very tentatively in the pattern and get it back down on the ground without killing myself or tearing up the airplane. We could have both been court-martialed for that, and probably should have been. But he said, "Well, you'll have to come down and visit me at my base." He was only based about 40 miles from my base at Thorpe Abbotts.
Yeah. You know what? Let's come back to that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna tell a little bit more about Sully because it's quite a remarkable story. So John did his flight training with the 100th Bomb Group, and Jim also, who will come up here in a little bit, the Bloody 100th. Why did it get that name? It's because of the heavy losses. The 100th Bomb Group had an interesting history. They didn't lose like one or two bombers. They lost them in chunks. We'll get to a particular mission in October of 1943 that John flew. But there were some times where, in one case in that time period, on the 10th of October 1943, the 100th Bomb Group put up 13 airplanes over a target of Munster, Germany. One of them came back. The whole group was gone, completely gone. And we'll talk about that here in a second. Just moving, We can kind of slide over your flight training, but this is John Luckadoo in his Class A uniform, looking very, very smart, and that was one of the airplanes that you flew on the right, Sully 2.
Yes.
And John went over, well, supposedly went over with the group, but you got hung up in Newfoundland for a little bit, and the reason being, I guess, it's a grown-up crowd. The pilot slept with the wrong person and got a little souvenir, shall we say? And so John was delayed for 2 weeks, and the pilot's name, well, we'll leave that alone. But anyway, he was basically poured into the cockpit, and John flew the aircraft and his crew over the Great Circle route from Newfoundland. Did you stop in Iceland?
No.
Or did you stop in Greenland?
No.
Flew straight through to Prestwick.
No. Just flew from Newfoundland to Prestwick.
That's a long haul. And they landed in Prestwick, and then were brought down to join the 100th Bomb Group at their air base at Thorpe Abbotts. And so let's talk a little bit about flying combat. John went on the second mission, or did you go the first? Did you fly the first mission with the 100th?
No, the second.
Second, that's right. So here you are. You're in England. Nobody knows exactly what they're, like you said, what they're getting into. And this is back when the Luftwaffe was very good at what they did. And the 8th Air Force kept pushing to get farther and deeper into Fortress Europe and into Germany. And of course, the theory was, well, you can talk about fighter escort and maybe a little bit about the early missions that you flew, John.
Well, the strategy of daylight bombing in mass formation was a product of what was known as the Bomber Mafia.
That's right.
Which was a group of generals at Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama, who between the wars, between World War I and World War II, developed the theory and the strategy that if we could take and had the right equipment, heavy bombers at high altitude, and we're talking 25 to 30,000 feet, 5 miles above the ground, in mass formation for mutual protection, with fighter escort to fend off the fighters, that we could bring the German right to its knees. This was a theory. It was unproven. And the British, the Royal Bomber Force under Sir Arthur Harris, was adamantly opposed to our going out in the broad daylight and begged us and did everything in his power to prevent us from going out in the daylight, because he said, you will never withstand your losses. The Germans had the air superiority over all of occupied Europe. And they knew what they were doing. They were more experienced, they were better equipped, and the odds were just too great against us. We actually gave the British 20 B-17s, but they weren't equipped for combat. And they went out in the broad daylight, and the Germans shot them to shrivels. They just shredded them. And so Sir Arthur Harris says, well, it's foolish, suicidal. We will only bomb at night, and we will not fly in formation, of course. We will fly at a lower altitude, 12 to 15,000 feet, and send pathfinders out ahead of the formation to drop flares. and we'll bomb on those flares. Now, we termed that saturation bombing because at dark and night, they didn't have any idea where the bombs were going to land. But honestly, even with our secret so-called weapon, the Norden bomb sight, we didn't know where ours were going to land either. As a matter of fact, the bomb assessment after the war proved that the 8th Air Force did not come within 9 miles of the target 25% of the time. And that meant, because what rules of engagement were, that we could not drop unless the bombardier could actually visually identify the target. We had to divert to a secondary target. And if that was closed because of cloud cover or smoke or anti-aircraft power or whatever, we would take our bombs and drop them in the channel rather than land with them because they were armed and they were too dangerous. But the strategy, the theory of daylight, high altitude, unpressurized bombing by the 8th Air Force was unproven. And we were guinea pigs. We were sent out to prove this theory. But the fallacy of it was that bomb sight, when you drop a free-falling object from 5 miles up, it goes through all sorts of different air currents before it impacts the ground. So if you hit the target, it's an accident.
If I may, John, John started flying missions with the 100th in June of 1943. At that point, an 8th Air Force bomber crew at a B-17 or a B-24 had to complete 25 missions, and that gave you the right to go home. You completed your tour. The veracity of the Luftwaffe and the lack of good fighter escort proved to be very, very costly to the 8th Air Force. In October of 1943, the average life expectancy, especially between what's been called Black Week, the 8th through the 14th of October of 43, the 8th Air Force lost 138 heavy bombers and 34 fighters. And there's 10 crewmen on each aircraft. And the average life expectancy for an 8th Air Force bomber crew was 7 missions. Quite something to think about when you're 19 or 20 years old, that you have to wake up and face that. And I'll let John continue. In fact, maybe we could go up and talk about your worst mission, and I think I know which one it was. October 8th, 1943, the target was Bremen, Germany.
Well, that was my 22nd mission. And the crew that I had originally gone overseas with had done a full tour, excepting one gunner and myself. And the reason that I didn't finish up with the original crew was because they implemented a policy that when your crew was designated as the lead crew of the formation, the co-pilot, and I was originally a co-pilot, was pulled out, and a command pilot was put in his place to command the entire formation. And the co-pilot then was sent back to fly the tail gun position. Huh? They put me in the tail on the first missions that we were leading. And I had never fired a .50 caliber in my life. I didn't know what I was doing back there. And of course, it was freezing cold, and you're isolated from the rest of the crew sitting out on the tail of the airplane. You've got twin .50 caliber machine guns. The gunners had to clean the guns and load them and say, well, you just aim through this little circle and pointer and fire. They didn't tell me that if you held down the triggers more than 3 seconds in a burst, you burned out the barrels. Mm-hmm. The heat from the projectile going through the muzzle of the gun would heat up so that the gun would freeze up. Well, of course, I'm sitting back there, dumb and happy, and all of a sudden we come under attack, and I'm just spraying lead all over the sky and promptly burn out both barrels. So the rest of the mission, I'm sitting there like a knot on a log. And all I could report was to the pilot and the command pilot that I was seeing airplanes go down or we were being attacked, but they had to switch channels then and radio the rest of the formation. And by then the danger was gone. But I got back and I said, look, you never trained me as a gunner. I had 0 training as a gunner. I was trained to fly this mother. And if the pilot is ever incapacitated, the co-pilot, of course, is second in command of the crew. So you had the heavy responsibility of 9 other lives on your shoulders as well as your own. And so I adamantly refused to fly in the tail again. And they said, all right, Lucky, you'll have to sit on the ground then when your crew leads the mission. And I said, gladly. So as a result, I was 4 missions short when they finished up, and they did the fastest tour in the European theater in 89 days. They flew every mission. This pilot that was humiliated with his actions in Newfoundland wanted to finish up so quickly and get home. He was married, he had a son, and he wanted to get back, and so he volunteered us for every mission. And with the exception of this one gunner and myself, they finished up to 25, first in the hundreds to do so, and one of the few that did. Now, something happened to the 100 bomb group that didn't happen to any other group in Europe or the 8th Air Force, and nobody to this day knows why. And that was this. When I graduated from my flying school in February of 1943, they took 40 of us and sent us immediately to Kearney, Nebraska, where the 100 bomb group was ready to ship out overseas. They pulled all of the co-pilots out and stuck us new second lieutenants, second in command of each crew, into the right seat. We had never been in a B-17 before, or any 4-engine aircraft. We graduated from twin-engine flying school, and we were such novices, and we had no familiarity with this heavy bomber and we had no familiarity with the crews. And of course, some of them became very resentful of having been all the way through pre-combat training as a unit. And then suddenly, at the last minute, having the second or in command pulled out and replaced by somebody so ignorant as we were. And to this day, nobody knows who ordered that. They didn't do it to any other group in the 8th Air Force. And no historian has ever picked up on it.
That's right.
And I was very disappointed that the Masters of the Air documentary didn't mention it, because I certainly pointed it out to their screenwriters during the 10 years that they were in production.
Speaking of Masters of the Air, has anybody caught it on Apple? If you aren't aware of it, it's a 10-part miniseries that was produced by two guys you might have heard of, a guy by the name of Steven Spielberg and another guy by the name of Tom Hanks. You might have seen one or two of their things. They went to Apple TV, and based on a book by Donald Miller, wrote this and produced this miniseries. And this is a picture of John and a host of others, including Jim, at the premiere in Hollywood. And you can see on the left is none other than Tom Hanks, and on the far right is Gary Getzman, who was the producer. And the other gentleman from left to right is Hank Cervantes, who's passed on, and John, and Bob Wolf, who just passed away. In fact, they took Bob's ashes and they brought it to Thorpe Abbott's, and his ashes were spread at his air base in England. And then, of course, we've got Jim here. And here's Lucky with Hollywood royalty. This is John with Callum Turner, who played the character of Major Bucky Egan. And then over here, John is consulting with Steven Spielberg on his next project. Is that something like that, right?
And Don Miller.
And Don Miller. So if you haven't caught it, don't be afraid of Apple. It's about $10.95 a month, and it's a great miniseries. And my favorite part of it was the last episode, where Tom Hanks narrated a spot called The Bloody Hundredth. And guess who's in the show? And then a host of other veterans that are no longer with us. So anyway, John had a pretty neat experience out there. So if I can tell, in August of 2023, I live down in Lakeville, and I've got a very trusted mechanic in Apple Valley. It was time to get an oil change. So I brought my laptop, and I had to continue working and such, and I was doing something, and all of a sudden my phone went off, and I looked at it, and, oh, it's John. I said, hey, Lucky, how are you? He says, oh, we talked and caught up a little bit, and he said, I want you to save 3 spots on your October tour for me, my daughter Lainey, and my son-in-law Rick, because we want to go to England. And I kind of went, and you were 101 at the time. What could go wrong, right?
And but by God, the 80th anniversary.
That's right. Yep. He wanted to go back for the 80th anniversary of Black Week, which is what we commemorated. So I traveled with John, and we went together. I went down to Dallas, and we flew. This is him aboard a Delta Airlines A330, very gracious captain who was wonderful to John. And I made the remark I said, if you guys kind of get tired, you can get John up here, you can take it for a while. So, and this is just some shots of John in England. And I got to tell you folks, the outpouring of admiration, of thanks, of graciousness, and the British were absolutely head over heels to have him back. We traveled all throughout, and it was John was kind of like the Pied Piper. It was an incredible experience. And this is just 2 shots. We start our tours off by going to High Wycombe. For anybody that doesn't know that was called Pine Tree. It's a very, very difficult place to get into. It's a private girls' school called Wickham Abbey, and during the war, it was commandeered by the 8th Air Force and also RAF Bomber Command, and it was a huge facility, and we actually walked into the very office that was once occupied by General Ira Aker, the original commander of the 8th Air Force, and General Doolittle. It was quite stirring. And during our trip into London, we went into St. Paul's Cathedral, and one of the things that we really do to end the trip in a very powerful way, there's the American Roll of Honor. And this is a big book that was commissioned by Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1946. And what it has is the names of all the Americans that were killed in action in defense of Britain. Most of them are 8th Air Force crew members. And we brought John into not only one of the most famous churches in the world and saw the handiwork of Sir Christopher Wren, but we walked back and John had a very, very special honor. He was allowed to turn a page in the Roll of Honor, which was a pretty special thing, wasn't it?
It was.
It sure was. And this is his visit back to Thorpe Abbotts. The upper left picture is his daughter to his right, and his son-in-law Rick to the left. The control tower is actually 2 stories high. You walk in the entrance, and there's a stairway that takes you up to the next level, or the second story, and that was flying control. That was air traffic control and such. But then you go out onto the balcony, and then there's another stairway that goes up to the top, up to where you can see the picture of the right. They call it the greenhouse. And it's a pretty sturdy climb, and I'll tell you what, John ran up that thing like a squirrel on fire. He got up there and he was pointing everything out to Laney and Rick, because this was fulfilling a lifelong dream to take his daughter back to his air base. And we finished up, and it was time to leave, and I knew that this was going to be a challenge. And that we really had to be game on just to protect John's health. We kept him off of social media to give him his privacy with his family. And I knew that at some point in time during that 12 days we were together, God was going to give me a moment. And this was it. We came down from the top of the greenhouse to the balcony, and I had a gentleman in front, and I said, "You catch him if he goes forward, I'll catch him if he goes back." And we took step and then step and step, and we got down to the balcony. And the other guys kind of rushed off and went away. And all of a sudden, we just stopped. And John came up, and I took this picture without him knowing. That's John standing on the control tower at Thorpe Abbotts, and rightly so, he will be the last 100th Bomb Group veteran that'll ever visit that base. And I got my moment. And John, I knew what was going on. John was back in 1943, and he just stared out at the field, said nothing. And I knew just leave him alone, don't rush him, and when he's ready to go, we'll go. And so it was quite a moment, wasn't it?
It was.
Yes,
indeed.
it was. So let's go back and talk about this gentleman. This is another special story. This is, once again, Leroy Means Sullivan, who was flying in 5-6 Squadron, and we left off of the story of Sully was stationed about 30 miles away from Thorpe Abbotts at a place called Marshall Keefe. And the squadron had just transitioned from Spitfires into this new airplane called the Hawker Typhoon. And it was a very, very, very formidable aircraft. It was fantastic in terms of ground attack. But one problem in the early stages of the development of the airplane was they had a lot of problems with the engine. And so I'll let you tell the story.
Well, actually, the engine was so powerful that the torque, or the whirling of the propeller, as the pilot would be taking off down the runway, would pull it off to the side. And in order to counteract that, the pilot had to take off with full opposite rudder just to keep it on the runway. And when I finally wiggled enough time to take a B-17 crew down to his base to visit him. It was one afternoon, and I found his base and lined up for the runway, and the runways on a fighter field are half as long as a bomber's. And so I was standing on the brakes to keep from running off the edge end of the runway. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw this smoldering wreckage. Well, I taxied on up to the control tower, and the officer of the day came out and said, "Hey, Yank, are you lost? You need petrol? Why are you here?" And I said, "No, I'm just on a social call to say hello to my best friend, Flight Lieutenant Sullivan." And he said, "You knew him?" And I said, "Well, of course, he's my best friend from home." And he said, "Well, you have to see the CO." And I said, "Well, look, I know that's the protocol. You land at a foreign base, you go report to the commanding officer and tell him why you're there and what your needs are." And he said, no, you've got to see him." So he ushered me into this wing commander's office, who was sitting there writing and didn't even look up. And I cleared my throat and I said, "Pardon me, sir, but I'm here just to say hello to my best friend, Flight Lieutenant Sullivan. Could I please be shown to his quarters, and I have to get back to my base?" Well, he looked up and he said, "My God, Yank, you knew him?" And I said, "Well, sir, he was my best friend." He said, "Did you see the wreckage when you landed?" I said, "Yes." He said, "We lost Sully yesterday afternoon. He was taking off in this vicious typhoon, and just as he cleared the runway, his engine quit, and with a full opposite rudder, he just cartwheeled in and never knew what hit him."
And so this is in November of 1943, and you'll see a picture here. John escorted his best friend, and he was buried in the Canadian sector of a large cemetery south of London called Brookwood Cemetery. And you can see John in the right-hand picture. He's kind of sticking out with the American uniform. This is obviously a Royal Air Force affair, and Sully, rightly so, was buried with full military honors. So when we went to England back in October of 23, we give our guests a free day in London. Do whatever you want. Just don't get arrested because we don't have bail money. So I talked to John and I thought about this and I said, "Hey, I don't know what you and Laney and Rick want to do in London, but I got an idea. What do you think about this?" I said, "I've got a bus. I'm paying for it all day, and all it's going to do is take us to the Royal Air Force Club for dinner tonight. So I've got a free bus at my disposal. I can have it out in front of the hotel, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, we'll finish breakfast. Let's jump on the bus. When was the last time you were at Brookwood Cemetery to go pay respects to Sully?" And you said, "The day I buried him." And I said, "Well, then we're going." And so on a beautiful Sunday morning, we took John down. This is a picture of his friend who was 21 years old. And this was the first gravestone that was placed at the cemetery. And this is a picture of John. And I commandeered a couple of American flags, and I said, we've got to put them in. So we went down, and it was an incredible moment, wasn't it, John?
Terribly, yes.
Yeah. And so the story kind of continues here a little bit about Sully. When you came home after your tour, you went to see his mom.
I did. I called on Mrs. Sullivan, and she said, well, you were his best friend, and he's buried over there among strangers, and I want you to see that his remains are returned to Chattanooga. And I said, Ms. Sullivan, it's still wartime. And Sully was not flying for the Americans. He was flying for the king. As a Royal Canadian Air Force man, he had to pledge allegiance to the king. And so the Americans would not return his remains. And that's why he's buried in England. And Mrs. Sullivan said, I want you to see that his remains are returned. And I said, Miss Sullivan, I'm terribly sorry, but there's nothing I can do. I have no influence whatsoever with the British. And he did get the proper accord with a full military funeral, and he's buried properly in England. And there's nothing more that I can do. And she never spoke to me again. But last October, some friends of mine arranged to mount a cenotaph at the foot of Mrs. Sullivan's grave.
This is Nellie Sullivan's grave in the graveyard
in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
And we went to Chattanooga and installed this this plaque.
The cenotaph.
And the really moving part about it was that Mark saw to it that some of the soil from his gravesite in England was gathered and shipped to the States, where it had to be sanitized and processed or it couldn't be entered. And that was encapsulated in a capsule that my daughter and I lowered down to the casket of Mrs. Sullivan and capped it off with Sully's cap. And they fired a 7-gun salute and blew last call, which was the equivalent of taps. And there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Canadians sent 2 representatives, and they presented us with the Canadian flag. And so Sully had written in a journal or in a letter to a friend that had been quoted that if he should die, a little piece of Tennessee would be there. So I really think he had a premonition that he was not coming back. He was never going to survive the war and did not. But may he rest in peace.
Amen. At that, may I bring up the other gentleman to join you on stage here, John?
Surely.
Excellent.
High time.
Let's do it. This is Second Lieutenant James Rasmussen, who is on your far left, who is a navigator. Yes. Jim was a navigator in the 100th Bomb Group, 349th Bomb Squadron, and completed 33 combat missions during his tenure with the 100th Bomb Group. Here's a couple of pictures of Jim with his crew, the Wilkes crew at Thorpe Abbotts. And Jim is seen up here, that tall, handsome dental standing all to the far left. And this one, he is sitting to the far right, just a nice candid photo. And very quickly, this is a list of Jim's missions. And if you see it, there's not a lot of easy ones. They were all deep into Germany. Some of them, I mean, very deep. And I think you went to Berlin twice, right, Jim? Fighter kite? Yep, that's it. And then here's another picture of Jim talking to Elvis, Austin Butler, at the premiere. Honestly, no, Austin Butler was a gem, a really, really gentleman to these guys, and was fascinated in listening to the short amount of time that they had in talking about their war experiences. And then over on the your far right is Bob Holstrom, who was a tail gunner in the 492nd Bomb Group, 801st Bomb Squadron. He flew with a very famous unit that was really not very well known until well after the war, called the Carpetbaggers. And Jim flew very interesting clandestine missions, dropping resistance agents into Germany at night, flying in a B-24 four-engine Liberator bomber. And it's quite an interesting occupation, that's for sure. This is a shot of Bob with his crew, and he's on the lower left, as you can see. This is the type of airplane that he was flying in, the B-24 Liberator, and of course this was his office in the back as the tail gunner. And then there's another photo of him and his crew. And then lastly, we have this rascal. This is Les Shrink. And Les was a ball turret gunner, which was a very interesting occupation. He flew in the 327th Bomb Squadron, the 92nd Bomb Group, out of Poddington, England. Born in Lesser Prairie, Minnesota, and enlisted in the Army Air Corps in November of 1942. And this was his office. This was the ball turret, honest to gosh. They crawled into this thing, and it was located on the bottom of the aircraft in a prone position. Why was this a good idea? But anyway, this was his office. This is what he saw the war in, and it's an amazing thing. And this is a photo that was taken of Les during some stateside training. Les is second from the left standing. And these are the missions that he flew. And on the 22nd of February, when he went to Aalborg, Germany, he only made it halfway because his crew was attacked by a very, very ferocious attack of German Luftwaffe fighters. He was shot down. He'll talk about that in a second. Captured, interrogated at Dulag Luft 1 near Frankfurt, and then was moved to Stalag Luft 6, and then eventually was moved to Stalag Luft 4 deep into Poland. And we'll talk about that here in a second. This is when he was shot down. This is the telegram that his parents received. He got one of these and just basically said that he was shot down and missing in action. They didn't know at that time if he was a POW. Later on, the family was informed that he was under the capture of the Germans.
That's wrong.
Wrong?
They never did tell my parents.
I apologize. So they lived for almost 2 years without knowing what the heck happened to you, right, Les?
Not quite that long, because I had a girlfriend in England, and I was shot down in February, and they didn't find out until I was captured May 31st, but that was from my girlfriend, not from the War Department.
Wow, how about that? When you, Les, since you led off here, let's talk a little bit about your time in the Stalag. I don't think people can actually imagine the conditions that they were put under. It was certainly a lot more pleasant than what Mr. Mickelson went through in Japan, I could assure you of that. But describe a little bit about your time in the Stalag, Les.
Well, it wasn't very good. I weighed 185 pounds when I was shot down. I weighed 93 when I was liberated, but I had already been liberated for about 2 weeks, so I don't know exactly what I weighed. I imagine I gained a little bit back, but you suffered from lack of food, the cold, dysentery. You had fleas, lice, and bed bugs. it was not very comfortable.
But then as the Russians started to move into Germany and push westward, they all of a sudden came up with a good idea. Okay, everybody, grab your stuff because we're going to go on a little walk. And they basically used the prisoners as more or less kind of hostage, if you will. And Les endured a terrible, horrific experience in regards to, they call it the forced march. And you marched for, what was it, 89 days?
86 days.
86 days.
It's called the German Death March. And if you Google it, be sure you say German Death March, because there's also a Japanese.
So they marched the prisoners westward. They had no accommodations for them. This is the harshest winter that Europe had experienced in over 50 years. They slept in whatever shelter they could find. Food was at a minimum, and the rules were what would happen if you stepped out of line, or you fell down, or refused or couldn't march anymore. Less.
One of the German guards would stay back with the prisoner. You'd hear a single gunshot, and then the German guard would rejoin the formation.
It's a horrific thing, and Les was very lucky to survive. Hundreds of POWs didn't in that time. In the Heidi Krieg Run, which was just they forced the prisoners to run, and obviously describing his physical condition, that was an insurmountable task for a lot.
Not only did they force us to run, but this is the middle of July. They made us put on our overcoats. They shackled us in twos. Then they handed out Red Cross parcels and chased us down the road, and knowing fully well that you drop the parcels and they could claim it as their own, claiming that we didn't want the parcels.
That's it. That's good. Thank you, Les. Let's turn over to Bob. Bob was, like I said, in a very, very interesting group called the Carpetbaggers. And Bob, maybe describe for the folks, some of the clandestine missions that you flew.
I flew 30 suicide missions over Europe, all the way over to Russia, all the way over to Switzerland. And Switzerland looked like New York City when you're flying up in the airplane. You can see it 50 miles away. It was really interesting. But our training was very, very good for our carpetbaggers. We trained at the last missions in Idaho and at Mountain Home. And it was like Europe. Idaho is flat and then mountains, and that's where we trained to fly at night, because we flew 500 feet high or lower over Europe at night. And we had such good training. Our navigator, he could find an area to supply the underground with the things that we dropped for their survival in a room this size, and fly and find that, and we'd drop the supplies to the underground. And we had cylinders of heavy cardboard that I could just barely reach around, and they held 300 to 350 pounds of material, including like bombs and dynamite to blow up railroad tracks, telephone poles to arrest Germans, hand grenades, throwaway pistols, machine guns, blood plasma, shoes, anything that the underground needed to survive. And they needed a lot because they were living in the mountains. They never come to town. If they would have come to town, they'd have been shot and their families would have been killed also. But it made me feel good. We supplied 350,000 underground people through the war in 44 and 45. and it made me feel so good. We never dropped a bomb or intended to kill anybody. We just helped with survival, and they claimed that what we did saved the war and made it about a year less than it would have been if we hadn't done our duties. And it was the winter of 44 and 45 was the coldest one we had in Europe in 100 years. And sometimes when we flew, it was 40 below zero. And I was in the tail of that airplane, and it was wide open. If you would stand on a pickup and drive 140 miles an hour in that cold, you'd understand what we were going through. It was not very good. We did have electric suits and goggles, gloves, and footwear, but sometimes they got burned out and they didn't work very well.
Sure.
And it wasn't very comfortable. Sometimes we'd have come back and warm up for a long time when we got on the ground. And they really appreciated our being there. I met a couple of the spies in 2006 in Washington, D.C. that we had dropped. And they were very interesting. My daughter really got along with them really well. She's sitting over here by me. She's my historian and my bookkeeper and what have you. And she's also the president of my American Legion post in North St. Paul.
Yeah, how about that? Jennifer, thank you.
But flying was so uncomfortable. When we would take off, I'd sit with my back to the bomb bay, and the four of us in the back of the airplane would sit in crash position, and we'd be going down the runway, and we'd be bouncing, and I would call that we'd finally get to the end of the airport, and we'd take off. At the end of our field was a slight rise with some trees. And sometimes when we'd take off, we'd had come back, we'd have branches and leaves in the
That's right.
in the landing gear. And some of the planes didn't make it, but we were lucky and had a good pilot. Our crew was trained very well. It was just an amazing thing to be involved with the CIA. You know, my records are not on my DD-214.
Yes,
There's 3
that's right.
stories underground in Falls Church, Virginia.
Well, Bob,
And then one trip we made to Washington, D.C., and they gave the 20 of us that are alive yet from our bunch in World War II the Congressional Gold Medal, which
That's
I'm
wonderful.
very proud of.
That's great. Bob, thank you very much, Bob. We're going to give Jim an opportunity here, then we're going to open the floor up for questions from the audience. Jim, I think I can probably answer this question, and I think it's something that most people don't really know if you study 8th Air Force history. In May of 1945, there was a pocket in Holland that had not been liberated near Rotterdam, Barendrecht, that area, the Hook of Holland, if you know it. There was an area where the Germans, as a reprisal, actually started to go against the Dutch population. They blew up the dikes, they flooded the agriculture in the fields, and in the winter of 1944, the Dutch referred to it as the hunger winter because they didn't have anything to eat. And over 25,000 innocent Dutch civilians perished from malnutrition. Queen Wilhelmina, who was in exile in London, begged Churchill and Roosevelt, it was Truman at the time, President Roosevelt had recently passed, to do a humanitarian mission in regards to dropping food parcels to the starving Dutch civilians. And the operation by the British was called Operation Manna. The Americans called it Operation Chowhound. And the 100th Bomb Group, who was sent over to destroy the enemy, to kill our sworn enemy at the end of the war, they switched their bombers from dropping bombs to dropping food to save lives. And I know Jim had participated in some of those missions, and I know that is probably his finest hour, if you will, his proudest moment. So Jim, tell a little bit about what you had to do during the Operation Chowhound missions.
Well, it's so often people ask me, what was the most memorial mission that you ever flew, and I always think it was the first one and the last one, and of course the last one is what he's referring to, is where we were dropping food in Holland. We had made a special arrangement with the Germans that we would had certain corridors that we had to fly in, and as long as we stayed in those corridors, they wouldn't shoot at us. And what was the wonderful thing about this, we'd come in at low altitude, probably 300 feet or more, and you could see the German soldiers with their mechanical equipment and whatnot standing alongside the road watching us. But we'd also see the Dutch population that was standing, waving flags and cheering and showing their appreciation for us coming in to drop food. And so it was quite satisfying to see this happening. One of the most interesting things about the episode was within the last 5 years, I've met two people that had been children, like 11 years old and 8 years old at the thing when we dropped food, and they remembered us coming over, and they remembered that they had a change in diet after we had flown over there. So it was, like I say, one of the missions that you remember the most
Was saving lives.
Yes,
Yes,
saving
indeed.
lives. Yeah.
Well, should we?
Yeah.
What?
Good stories never go away. So at altitude, you were this unpressurized aircraft. There was not any first class or comfort plus or anything like that aboard the airplane. And if you drank enough coffee in the morning, Mother Nature would have to obviously come around and you'd have to use the facilities. And there was a thing on board an airplane called a relief tube. I'll let you tell the story from there.
Well, actually, this is one of the stories I wish I'd never told any about in the first place. When they want to remember what did I do during the war, this is what they bring up. We had a rule on the airplane that before the people up in the front of the plane had a relief tube, and there was two of us in the nose, and then three up with the co-pilot and engineer and pilot. So there was 5 of us that used the forward relief tube. Well, and the rule was you were always supposed to tell the ball turret gunner to swing his before he used the relief tube to swing his gun to the rear, and you can imagine if he had his guns pointed forward, and of course you're flying at altitudes where it's 30 below degrees, and that certain things happen to liquid quite rapidly up there. So, and of course I forgot to tell the ball turret, and his screen was completely covered with frozen liquid. Let's put it that way. So.
And he kind of he's kind of a little upset about that.
Yeah, well, of course he says, I could have just as well stayed home because I can't see anything to shoot my guns anyway. So.
Well, on that note, I can't think we could end the evening any better than that. No, Let's open this up for questions and answers. Is Chris up there? There he is. Who's got a question? Anybody just raise your hand and Chris will bring the microphone to you. There we go. A couple over here. Terrific. Ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Luckadoo, this question is for you. You mentioned that when you went over, you were replacing a co-pilot, and so essentially, I think you arrived in England without any combat crew training. I'm wondering if you had to start flying operational missions immediately, or if you had at least a week or two of practice missions.
Did you hear that, John?
Yeah, I couldn't.
Once you reached England, she was saying that you were held, we held back in Newfoundland, and once you reached Thorpe Abbotts, there was a time period where the group had to train. They just didn't throw them up in the air and say, "Give her hell, boys, go bomb Germany." That you had a combat indoctrination, flying formation, flying around, getting familiarization with landmarks around Thorpe Abbotts in England. So I guess her question was, how long did it take you before you, in terms of training, before you flew your first mission?
Well, when we finally arrived in England at our air base at Thorpe Abbotts, this pilot, as I believe I mentioned, volunteered us for every mission. And we flew the second one, which was possibly 2 weeks after we arrived in England.
Right.
And we were suddenly faced with the realities of combat very quickly. And from then on, almost daily.
Good question. Who else has got one? Here you go.
This question is for Les. When your plane was shot down, how did you get out of the ball turret? You're not wearing a parachute either. And how old were you when you were shot down? And I could ask this for any one of you guys, but how did you keep going on those missions each time? How could you get the courage up to get back in that plane? But tell me about when your plane was hit. What happened, Les?
I was 20 years old when I was shot down, and we had already bombed the target, and we were 20 minutes away from the nearest land when a Ju-88 set our number 4 fuel tank on fire, and the tank kept on exploding. I bet that tank exploded a good 100 times by the time we hit landfall, which was 20 minutes away, and we just barely made landfall. There was one final explosion that blew the wingtip off, and that's when I bailed out.
Interestingly enough, there's a picture, Les, behind you. Les, I guess maybe kind of for closure, for reconciliation, or just out of curiosity, he found the German pilot that shot him down. And this is a picture of Hans Hermann Mueller and the type of aircraft that he flew, a Junkers Ju-88 G6. It was actually a night fighter, but they anything they could put in the air to go against the bomber formations, they did. And this is a picture of Hans Mueller in World War II. But Les did something pretty remarkable. You became very good friends.
Yes, but the reason I wanted to actually thank him, because most German pilots, if you bailed out, I mean, not most of them, but a good many of them, would shoot you in the parachute. And in this case, he had 20 minutes to finish us off, and we would have landed in the North Sea, and of course we would have all been drowned. So I actually wanted to find him to give him my thanks for saving my life and the lives of our crew.
How about that? Amazing. Another question? Anybody else? Here's one down here. You probably.
So when you're in
B-17s.
How do you not shoot your own planes? All these 50 calibers going everywhere.
The question, if everybody didn't hear, was
That happened quite often. It
Yeah.
was called friendly fire.
yes,
You didn't do it on purpose, but you'd be swinging your machine guns at an enemy plane, and all of a sudden, here's one of our planes. I don't remember it happened to myself, but it was quite common.
and also as the escort fighters, they usually would not chase the Germans through a formation of American bombers, and these are American fighters because they shoot at you. They just shot at
We
anything.
didn't have any fighters.
No, that's right. You didn't. Yep, that's right.
The early part of the war, you went in without fighters, and that's when you had the heavy losses.
Yep.
I didn't know of a single crew. There were some that finished their Magic 25, but I didn't know of a single crew that did make it. The highest that I knew was some friends of mine. They were flying their 23rd mission, got a direct hit, and they were all killed.
Wow. Well, I think we're unfortunately out of time. I think we could sit here all night. I know I could. In closing, wow. I sat there this afternoon and said, how do you shut down this program? How do you close it? And I started thinking, and a person admired for achievements and noble qualities. I'm not talking about myself. No, that is Webster's definition of what a hero is. A person admired for achievements and notable qualities. Perhaps in this day and age, we use that term hero maybe to describe a very well-paid athlete for throwing a football or hitting a baseball or putting a puck in a net. We use that word to describe the hero of the game, or he was the hero that won it for the team. To me, that's not a hero. A hero is someone that takes their life, a very young life, and serves and becomes a veteran. And when the world literally was at war and the free world was at its highest time of possible defeat, and when the world hung in the balance, these four gentlemen answered the call to serve in, like I said earlier, the greatest air armada in human history, the 8th Air Force. And you just heard a snippet of their stories. I can say that I certainly know what a hero is because we got four of them sitting right on this stage. So, gentlemen, thank you. Wow. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you very much. One of the great things that was not only combat flying missions, but one of the great things about being in England, you got to know some of the things about England and things. And one of the great things that had happened in England was there was, of course, no TV and things, but there was great on group singing, especially when you get into a pub or something. And I was always surprised by one of the songs that everybody over there seemed to sing a lot, and that was Beer Barrel Polka. But one of the songs that stuck with me the most was, "We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through just like you always do, till the sun will drive the dark clouds far away.
Wow. Wow. I didn't know you could sing. Wow. Well, just not to prolong the evening, but I just thank you, gentlemen, our local 8th Air Force heroes, but a special thanks to my dear friend and truly one of the finest gentlemen I've ever met in my life. I want to thank John Luckadoo and Bunker for coming so far from Dallas up to join us this evening. I love you, buddy, and thank you so much. If you care to purchase one of the books of Damn Lucky, and also Bob has a fantastic book that he's written, and both of those gentlemen will be up in a couple minutes. We got to take them up an elevator, and so please just limit your time because others will want to get a signature. And so just get up, say hi, shake his hand, get your book signed, and then we'll move on. So thank you so much for coming.
Support for this program provided by viewers like you. Thank you. Additional support provided through the Catherine B. Anderson Fund of the St. Paul Foundation. Upcoming roundtable topics can be found at www.mn-ww2roundtable.org. Production services provided by Barrows Productions.